The Life of Buddha, Episode 7, Four Messengers and the Decision to Leave Home to Seek the Way. Welcome back to the Life of Buddha series. In Episode 6, Prince Siddhārtha begins to realize the suffering and injustice in society despite living in a lavish palace. With deep compassion, he proposes social reforms, builds schools, and develops agriculture. However, he encounters many obstacles from the royal family and the conservatism of the aristocracy. Despite his perseverance, the prince realizes that human greed, selfishness, and laziness are not easy to change. He gradually contemplates karma and the nature of suffering, wondering if there is any way to truly change this society. The episode emphasizes the prince's perseverance, wisdom, and compassion on his journey to enlightenment, with the question of profound change in the human soul. The Life of Buddha, Episode 7, Four Messengers and the Decision to Leave Home to Seek the Way. According to the solemn tradition of ancient Brahmin families, the best son of this caste, when young, must take care of his studies, be well versed in the Vedas, languages, grammar, martial arts, military strategy, and the basics of learning. The second stage is to start a family. If he does not have a family and a son to continue the family line, he is not yet considered an adult. From here on, he must take care of raising and educating his children, at the same time serve society according to his ability and intelligence. The third stage of a person's life, when he is old, is to retreat, go to the garden to cultivate his mind and character. There may be an additional fourth stage for some people, which is to go into the forest to live the life of a hermit. The prince belonged to the Kshatriya caste, but his entire way of life and way of thinking used the Brahmin culture for many generations. Those four stages, as good cultural products, need to be maintained to bring moral values to the world, creating a spiritual foundation for the world to rely on. But for the prince, the practice of the path that was reserved for old age was not suitable. The practice, if achieved, required the ability, will, and physical and mental health of youth. He suspected that the four stages of the Brahmin's son were now just a formula, a lifeless label. From the day he discussed with his brothers about the meaning and value of life, the prince vowed to himself that he must find the answer. Then, after a while, he and Channa disguised themselves as merchants and went to shady parks scattered throughout the capital to meet monks, ascetics, and wandering ascetics. The prince wanted to learn from them the knowledge that he had not known. However, he was completely disappointed. Even the Vedic philosophy was unclear to them. Someone who was a little better said, "If you want to merge with the Supreme God, there are three ways. One is to make offerings and pray. 2 is to practice asceticism to eliminate desire. 3 is to meditate and meditate." Saying so was useless, because he knew more about those points than they did. It must be something else. Mostly, the prince only met dirty wandering mendicants, who seemed to be mainly making a living, but whose outward appearance seemed very ascetic. No one had yet exuded the sharpness of a respectable intellect. Whenever Channa reported that a group of strange ascetics had appeared, the prince would disguise himself and go there. Sometimes the ascetics were from Kosala, sometimes the mendicants were from Kosambi, from Vesali, from Rajagaha, or from Varanasi, and the most impressive group was the group of ascetics from the Himalayas, who had very majestic and imposing appearances. Their gestures, attitudes, and speech were very calm and composed. They all seemed to have attained meditation. The prince asked the questions that he had been wondering about for a long time. "Please tell me the purpose of the monastic life." "It is returning to Brahman, friend." "That is, by meditating to become one with him. Is that right, monk?" "That's right. Sir, that is the knowledge of knowledge. The student only wants you to show him that when he realizes like that, does the consciousness of this Atman exist or not? Existence and non-existence cannot be the correct statements to make about him, friend. So what is he? Who is he? Be blessed, my friend. When the consciousness of Atman has merged into Brahman, meaning there is no more feeling, perception, consciousness, then what is there to feel the bliss, O yogi?" Seeing that the old, stern priest seemed confused by that question, he opened another direction. "What the scholar wants to say is that blessing the eternal meaning and value of life, dear monk?" "Yes, it is immortal, my friend." The prince respectfully bowed to the old monk. Then, as usual, Channa brought cloth, oil, salt, various foods, rice cakes, vegetables, fruits, medicines, for the prince to personally offer to all the monks present that day. When he left, the prince was filled with joy. Although he was not yet satisfied, he had already determined one thing. The monks at Tuet Son had indeed cultivated and attained something. They exuded a calmness and stability that was worthy of respect. That day, the prince boasted to Yasodhara, "It is not all a dead end, Gopa. There are ascetics from the Himalayas who have found some meaning and value in the ascetic life in the mountains." Yasodhara could not help but share the joy, but she said a sentence with many meanings. "If the prince is happy, I am happy too. But the meaning and value of life are so far away, somewhere in Tuet Son, right? Come on, Gopa." At this time, the crown prince still regularly went to court, stayed by his father's side, and consulted on many matters without revealing any signs of meeting the Taoists. Thanks to his attentiveness, his ability to listen, and his ability to speak, the crown prince was able to convince the council of elders at least 3 things that satisfied him. The union bosses and small owners of groups of workers on each street agreed to raise the wages for craftsmen and small traders, such as carpenters, door assemblers, wheelwrights, wood carvers, tool makers, metal casting, masonry, textile workers, weavers, dyers, tailors, potters, tanners, painters, florists, wreath makers, livestock sellers, butchers, fishermen, fishmongers, cooks, barbers, bathers, laundrymen, servants or servants. Depending on the value of the work, the severity of the job, their wages were increased from 2 to 5 masaka per day. The big and small bankers had agreed to reduce their interest rates from 15 to 18% to 12 to 15% to encourage all classes of business to do business. Long-distance trade was reduced to 80 and sea trade to 180. This was a great success. He even proposed to a large syndicate to open a new business, insurance. A number of Brahmin agricultural and forestry experts from Kosala, who have graduated from Takasila University, have been invited to open training courses for professional cadres. Along with the training field, towns and cities must have specific agricultural promotion policies, such as reducing rent and taxes, providing fertilizers, seeds, and production tools. Plant varieties and forestry and mineral exploitation are also being researched. The prince received 2 more good news. Bhagu assisted the Lady Gautami and Yasodhara in completing 4 almshouses outside the 4 gates of the city to serve as food for the hungry and poor during the first and middle of the month. The princes voluntarily contributed their efforts and money to build 4 flower gardens, also in the suburbs, so that the people would have a place to play and have fun. This place was also a place for traditional cultural activities and held folk festivals. Without telling anyone, the day before yesterday, the prince asked Channa to saddle the horse. He wanted to see with his own eyes whether the buildings on the outskirts of the city were as beautiful as the princes had described. First, the prince strolled around the east gate of the city. It was a sunny day. Everything was full of life. On both sides of the road, the houses and gardens were all green and clean. He knew that this was the work of his father and the princes. The face of the capital appeared very bright and fresh. The shops were full of goods. People dressed neatly came and went busily. A few people bowed their heads slightly or stood far away when they saw the prince's luxurious carriage slowly passing by. This was the east gate with its high, thick brick arches that the prince had only passed through once. He had only seen glimpses of the activities and scenery outside the city and did not really know how the people lived outside. Channa said softly, "Life in the suburbs is not as rich and prosperous as in the city, Prince." "Yes, I know." The prince nodded slightly. The white horse carriage was leisurely moving, when in front of it, a group of people dressed in shabby clothes, carrying baskets, bags, sacks, jars on their heads, looking very heavy, walked in a single file on the side of the road. The prince stopped the carriage and got out. He knew that they were country people bringing goods to sell in the city. "Let me talk for a moment," he said to the man in front. "Don't be shy." The dark-skinned, bearded man, wearing an ash-gray robe, looked up at the prince. Recognizing him as a noble prince, he stopped in fear, his basket still on his head. Channa was tactful, telling everyone to put down their goods and rest for a while. "What are you selling?" The man answered very fluently, Most of them are agricultural products such as rice, corn, cassava, potatoes. Others are homegrown like bananas, papaya, vegetables. The man looked at the end of the row. Finally, cloves, star anise, cinnamon, pepper, and some medicinal roots and plants, sir. The prince nodded and smiled. Why don't our people in the countryside use these agricultural products instead of selling them? Sir, only when there is a need for something like a ceremony, wedding, or to buy household items do we save it to sell for money. Otherwise, we just exchange it around the village. So the lives of our people, are there many hungry people? Sir, we are not hungry, but the cold months are quite difficult. Whoever works has food to eat. In recent years, thanks to the benevolent king who loves his people, the farmers have suffered less. The prince smiled, expressed his thanks, then ordered Channa to give the entire group of about 20 people, each with 10 masaka, and then got into the carriage to continue their journey. Perhaps because Channa had revealed the prince's identity, as soon as the carriage started moving, the villagers shouted loudly, "Thank you, kind prince!" The prince glared at Channa and warned him, "Don't be so nosy next time." A moment later, the carriage stopped at the charity camp. Outside, the ornamental trees were green and cool. The tall trees had shade, dotted with clusters of red, white, and purple flowers, looking very poetic. He admired them. Inside, the brick walls combined with wooden planks created an airy space. The prince was about to step onto the platform. The wooden floor was used for distributing alms, connecting to a warehouse when in front. The carriage was bustling. The princes heard that the prince had left the palace to see the construction work, so they came in droves. And they were chatting and advertising the works of the ladies, Gautami, Yasodhara, Bagu. The prince felt his heart flutter with joy. Suddenly, before the prince's eyes, right next to the door, a skinny, dark skeleton staggered from the edge of the road. It was an old man, wearing a loincloth made of rags, his hair disheveled and half black and half gray-white, his back bent like a millstone, leaning on a stick, swaying back and forth. His eyes were deep like a water-filled pit. "What is it?" the prince asked in shock. "A human? How did he get into such a state? As an old man, too old, my prince. Yes, I know everyone has to grow old. But to grow old like that is terrible. It's normal, prince. Anyone who lives too long is like that. Especially those who are too hungry and lonely." The prince was silent, deep in thought. "Then I, Yasodhara, if I live long, I will all have that strange, hideous shape, like a monster." He sighed, looked at the princes, looked at Channa, and thought that all of them in the future will be like that. The prince shivered again, looked at the old man, but no one could see his figure anywhere. The prince no longer wanted to see the garden, quickly mounted his horse and told Channa to drive the carriage away, only having time to nod and greet the princes. Since seeing the old messenger, the prince's sadness became deeper. Youth, vitality, and youthful hair were no longer something to be proud of. Now the prince felt the chill of the wind's words from the other day. Broken, imperfect, time, nothingness swallows, nothingness digs the grave of this world. Oh, humans, no matter how full of fame and power, are still confined within the finite. What is the point of living? What is the point of living when at the end of life there is only a bunch of wrinkled bones, a back bent like a millstone? Time destroys and annihilates, sparing no one. Seeing that the prince had only eaten about half of the rice ball and then stood up, Yasodhara kindly asked, "Since returning from the suburbs, it seems like the prince has been very sad?" "Yes, I met an old man, Gopa. The sight of this old man was terrible. I thought, I will be like that, she will be like that. I am really very afraid. Youth is fleeting, all joys are fleeting. Now I feel more deeply what you and I used to talk about." That night, the prince dreamed again. He saw himself lying on a white cloud, drifting, gliding, over mountains, hills, valleys, rivers, lakes, and seas. Each country stretched out under his back. Then suddenly, the cloud fell into a deep, endless abyss. A raging fire rose from the ground, so hot it melted everything. The prince listened to the melting. After a long, long time, the white cloud suddenly transformed into a pink lotus, supporting the prince's back. A cool breeze covered his entire body. The prince was lifted up, sitting calmly in a state of absolute peace and tranquility. At that moment, in the middle of the sky, countless deities appeared. Flowers from the sky fell like snow. A flute and a lute played somewhere, echoing throughout the void, playing a song, the words, "The time has come, O Bodhisattva. Let us depart this day with wisdom's light, so pure and bright, to tread the timeless way. O Bodhisattva, perfect soul, now choose the path of light, the road to peace, the ancient quest, into the endless night. The time has come, O noble prince, awake to your great call. An old messenger stands before, to guide and lead through all." Dazed, the prince sat up. The sounds still seemed to be ringing in his ears. The scent of heavenly flowers still seemed to be intoxicating all around. Has the time come already? Has the angel reminded me? Sitting alone, thinking to himself, the prince did not want to disturb Yasodhara. After all, that heart was very weak. The news of the prince's shock at seeing an old man reached King Suddhodana, and he was also moved. Had a messenger appeared? The king asked his attendants in detail, then summoned the princes present at the time to the court. Anuruddha and Ananda immediately came. "Describe the old man's appearance to me," the king asked urgently. "How terrible." Anuruddha said, "This old man is old to the extreme of old age, hideous, ugly as a demon, your majesty. Saying that is useless." The king snapped, "Describe it clearly." "Your majesty." Ananda described clearly, "This old man is very special. It seems that all the ugliness, decay, old age, of all oldness are gathered in one person. Let the prince describe each detail. As for the old skeleton, it is black, bent like a millstone, walking unsteadily, swaying as if using all the remaining strength to move forward, backward, leaning on a stick. The skin is no longer skin, but like someone peeled the skin of a burnt chicken and then dried it in the sun for 5 or 7 days. It is wrinkled like a piece of dried betel nut, each sheet, each piece, feeling as if it will fall off if touched. The hair and beard are not known if they are hair and beard, or a disorderly bird's nest, crow's nest. The color of the hair, not knowing what color it is. It feels like chicken droppings, pigeon droppings, pooped in piles for a long time, half black, half white, giving off the stench of rotting flesh. The 2 eye sockets are 2 black deep holes filled with alum water. "Enough, enough," the king waved his hand. "Enough, I understand. But up until now," the king thought, "I have banished such ugly old people far away, haven't I? How strange. Then I heard that person disappeared like magic, like the time of the judgment of the red-headed crane. Or was there some divine being involved in this matter? Old people, old like the one Ananda described, must be terrifying. But perhaps because it was the prince's first time out of the city gate, his emotions were still fresh, and after a long time they would probably become numb. And when you get used to seeing things, everything becomes normal." The next day, calling the prince in, the king asked, "Are you scared when you see that old man?" "Yes, my lord. It has had a profound impact on my mind. Human life is tragic. Everyone is like that. So what is the point of accumulating, collecting, fighting and fighting, my lord? Getting old is normal, my child. Emotions are useless, my child. From now on, I will allow you to travel here and there to relax." That said, when the prince left the palace, the king secretly ordered several hundred guards to sweep the 3 southern, western, and northern gates to prevent sick and dead people. At the same time, he ordered the city's sanitation and janitors to make the routes the prince would pass through green, clean, and beautiful. But early the next morning, the prince did not ride a horse, but trudged out of the south gate with Channa in the guise of a merchant. The prince said to Channa, "We pretend not to know what our father is doing. We just want to observe the people. We just want to find out the real life of the people behind what our father wants to cover up." Then, the prince went to a poor working-class area. This was the Shudra residential area. They specialized in heavy and dirty chores such as carrying rocks, digging soil, building roads, dredging sewers, cleaning sanitary facilities, cleaning up rotten animals and dead people lying around the city. Having heard Yasodhara talk about these unfortunate people, the prince did not expect their poverty and misery to be beyond his imagination. The prince stood in awe before the tattered, dark tents that were worse than the stables and cowbells of the city's residents. The prince stood watching the wandering figures coming and going. Adults were wearing loincloths and were bare-chested, black and bony. Children were naked, with bulging bellies, leaden skin, and scabies. And everywhere there was garbage and flies. Channa whispered in the prince's ear, Most of the strong people were employed in the coolie teams, and at least they had something to eat. But there were the Chandalas, whose lives were even worse. They had no place to live, no work. They lived in sewers, abandoned temples. Everyone avoided them, and they did not dare to approach anyone from another class. So how do they live, Chana? When the work is too dirty, too hard, and the squires despise it or cannot do it, then it is their turn, Prince. A groan echoed from inside a tent. The groans seemed to be very painful. A man in a loincloth stood with his arms crossed, looking at the prince without showing any emotion. A child sat leaning against a wall, eyes wide open, looking at the stranger. The prince spoke in a friendly manner. "I mean no harm. Who is that moaning?" The man pointed to the pile of blankets in the corner, but said nothing. The prince bowed his head and walked in. A foul stench assaulted his nose. On the bare plank, a tattered blanket was carelessly draped over a writhing corpse. The person kept twitching and groaning like a mortally wounded animal. The prince was moved and walked quickly over. The sick person's eyes were white, his mouth was crooked, foaming with grease. Drops of sweat were dripping from his yellow, moldy skin. The prince gently lifted the person's head and placed it lightly on his arm, asking with great concern, "How does it hurt? Where does it hurt? And if you need my help, just tell me." Suddenly a deep voice spoke from behind. "That plague, there is no cure, just wait to die." Chana's voice was full of fear. "This disease is contagious, Prince. Stay away. Let's go, Prince." The prince looked at the sick man in shock. He was about 30 years old. His hands were shaking as he held tightly onto his robe. His breathing was getting more and more rapid. Sweat was pouring down. Foam was coming out of his mouth. The prince gently used a clean towel to wipe the sick man's face, absent-mindedly saying, "Can't be saved, Chana. Impossible. This disease is incurable. All doctors are helpless. You are so young, Chana." The patient in the prince's arms suddenly convulsed, screamed continuously, then turned his head and stopped breathing. Sickness and death, so fast? The prince could not believe his eyes. Will it be the same for me? Sickness and death will take me away, suddenly, unexpectedly, without knowing when. Oh, humans are completely helpless before old age, sickness and death. There is nowhere to escape. The prince stood up, absent-minded. After a while, he asked the man who owned the house and found out that the sick person was his son and the child was his nephew. The sick person's wife and several older children had gone to work as odd jobs in the city since dawn. The prince looked around. The house was shabby, empty, with nothing, and perhaps they had nothing to eat or wear. The prince ordered Chana to give the family enough money to cover their expenses for a while, and at the same time take care of the deceased. The man suddenly knelt down and stammered, "I didn't know it was you. I didn't know this was the benevolent prince. Please forgive me." Having said that, he cried, tears streaming down his face, silently. The prince gently lifted the man's hand to stand up and said kindly, "I can't help much. The hunger and poverty of the people is my fault, the fault of the leaders. I'm very sorry. Prepare the funeral for the dead. I'm leaving now." When he had left the house for a while, the prince said, "It is true that drops of water cannot save the whole desert." Lady Gautama was exhausted, and Yasodhara was also showing signs of fatigue. However, they still had enough heart and mind to complete 4 more merit camps, which is truly admirable. In the evening, the prince told Yasodhara everything, still moved, and did not forget to express his admiration for the 4 meritorious camps. "I am used to that story, that scene. There are diseases that look even more terrible than the plague. That is leprosy. Some people only have 2 eye sockets or deep mouths. They lose fingers, toes, even the elbows. Their bodies are covered with sores, pus, and blood, smelly, and look extremely disgusting. Everyone tries to stay away from them. They are like a strange animal living on the fringes of society. But you know, when compassion arises, it overcomes fear. I have been close to them several times, comforting them, not only distributing rice, bread, food, clothes, but also feeding them, because some people do not have a single finger left. Extremely respectful. The prince spoke from the bottom of his heart, looked at Yasodhara with affection and continued, "It turns out you know so much and have hidden it from me for so long." "Yes, it must be hidden," she said sadly. Who in this country does not know the prophecy of the ascetic Asita and the Brahmin Kondanya? If you were afraid of the four messengers, you would have left me and become a monk. The prince suddenly stood up and walked out onto the porch. At night, the moon was dim and hazy. He leaned his hand on the railing and looked at a few distant stars, dim and without light. Oh, my heart is also dim and hazy, without any light. Old age, sickness, and death inevitably control human life. How can one escape? And where does one escape from? The Vedic scriptures also talk about birth and death, reincarnation, karma, but they are a bit vague. In particular, the path of integration is worth noting. Returning to him, to that one, is the end of birth and death, the end of suffering. The night dew was cold. Yasodhara gently wrapped the prince in a thin and smooth velvet blanket to drape over his shoulders. The prince leaned over, held both of Yasodhara's hands and said, "Our hands are so small, and the sufferings of life are endless. What to do, Gopa?" That night, the prince found himself in another dream. He found himself struggling in the whirlpool and then being thrown out, crashing against a towering cliff. In the midst of the pitch-black white foam, the water rolled away, drifted down a deep abyss, and landed on a sandy beach, rippled with the phosphorescence of bones and skulls. Oh, a vast ocean without a single person, not a single boat, not a single sound of waves, not a single sound of life. The space was desolate, desolate to the point of horror. Suddenly, the surface of the sea split in two. The two sides of the water rolled up like a carpet, drifting in two different directions. In the middle appeared a flat, scenic road. The speckled drops of water suddenly blossomed into flowers, spreading out like mushrooms, stretching to infinity. The prince walked, light, weightless, as if not attached to anything. From the void, the angel's voice echoed clearly and distinctly into his ears. "The time has come. The time has come. O Bodhisattva, go. Depart, depart from pain and dark, where ignorance can't grow. Glide through the void with shadow's grace above the devil's snare. Despise desire's earthly chains and rise through purest air. Give up the throne, the fleeting light of morning's fleeting gleam. The clouds of noon, the fading sun are Maya's fleeting dream. A trick from Yaka's wicked hand, a hammock or a chain, a cycle full of endless pain where suffering still reigns. The world of fire, destruction burns. In every human heart, go seek the cure, the path away from death's eternal dark. Be brave like lions, strong and fierce, soar like the swan in flight. Do not bow down to earthly things, but seek the highest light. Let us raise the banner high on Mount Sineru tall. With sunlit mind and moonlit heart, let wisdom lead us all. No time to stop, no time to wait, no room for doubt or fear. Sing freedom's song, the final call, the path to truth is clear. The time has come, the time has come. O Bodhisattva, go, with gentle love and mighty strength, you'll reach the goal you know. The time has come. The prince was startled, sweat beaded on his forehead. He muttered, "Yes! I must go." Oh, how urgent and urgent that call was. I promised my friends that I would go and find something that does not really exist in this life. That is what truly has meaning, the eternal value of this life. How strange. Is that call from an angel or from me, gushing out from the unconscious? Contemplating the dream and the meaning of the song, the prince was absent-minded for several days. Chewing rice was like chewing straw. Drinking water was like drinking bitter medicine. Flowers no longer had fragrance, and even the incense burners had a faint smell of smoke and dust. The music and lyrics of the dancers, singers, and musicians were shrill, unpleasant sounds that pierced deep into his eardrums. Daytime wandering, nighttime dreaming. Yasodhara felt scared, came over, gently rubbed his back, and asked. The prince pondered for a moment and then said, "It's all right, Gopa. And wait, I can't say it yet. There is something in me that is not yet settled, not yet formed. When I feel it is clear, concrete, real, I will say it. Wait until it is ripe." A few days later, the prince and Channa, again dressed as ordinary merchants, walked out of the west gate of the city. This was a wide road, and the prince knew that if he continued on, he would come across a wide highway leading to the rich and powerful kingdom of Kosala. And if he continued to follow the caravans of pack horses and camels laden with goods, he would reach Takasila and certain kingdoms in the direction of the setting sun. The road to the west gate was very busy. The prince and Channa jostled with the pedestrians. On both sides of the road, shops were scattered all the way to the main road. 2-horse and 4-horse carriages of the Kshatriya generals, of the noble ladies, or of the wealthy merchants were bustling back and forth. Bulky carts of goods were lumbering towards Kapilavatthu or towards distant Kosala. The prince felt happy at the sight of such bustling, crowded activities. There were some special palanquins passing by. On both sides of the palanquins there were people playing flutes, some singing a joyful, peaceful tune. 2 huge camels with tall loads of goods had 2 riders with turbans on their heads, with bushy beards, some beating drums, some beating gongs, shouting for people to get out of the way. The prince and Channa stopped on a flat piece of land. A group of people crowded around a man performing a snake act. 2 huge cobras stood upright. Their fronts were protruding, their red tongues were sticking out, very scary. The man was wearing a loincloth, his body was bare, and his face, chest, back, and belly were painted with strange colors. It was the bright yellow of turmeric, the dark yellow of ochre, the red of vermilion, and the white of betel lime. It looked like a talisman to ward off evil spirits and demons. Suddenly, he shouted, "Om, Om," for a while. His eyes half closed, his mouth murmured as if reciting a spell. Then he raised the brass trumpet to his mouth with both hands, puffed out his cheeks, rolled his eyes, and blew a very wild, very jungle-like tune. The 2 snakes stood still, listening, shaking their heads this way and that. A moment later, they danced a snake dance, slithering forward, slithering back, twisting back and forth very rhythmically and skillfully. Then the man squatted down, blew the trumpet, and danced. Behind him 2 snakes danced. When one danced, the snakes danced. When one stopped, the snakes stopped. Everyone applauded and threw coins and silver coins onto the snake performer's tray. The prince smiled and looked at Channa. Channa understood, grabbed a handful of coins from the tray, and generously rewarded the performer. They walked to another crowd. Here, there was a man in a red loincloth, a red turban, walking barefoot through the blazing coals. People gave him money again. In another crowd, a large muscular man, his body gleaming black and brown, was lying on a table of iron spikes, his bare chest exposed, separated by a stone slab 3-finger thick. A taller, larger man, holding a very large iron hammer, tensed his body, his muscles rippling, braced himself, and then pounded it hard on the stone slab. The stone broke, but he was unharmed. People gave him money again. Another crowd, another place. A thin man, looking like an ascetic, was meditating on a table of spikes studded with sharp blades. He sat cross-legged, his back straight, his hands resting on his calves. He had been calm and composed for several hours. In front of him was also a tray with quite a lot of coins. How did that guy sit on the sharp knife for so long, Channa? No big deal, Prince. There are people who sit on sharp knives like that, but sometimes they even fly high. Oh, how strange. There was a Taoist priest who looked like a skeleton, lying in a bronze barrel, an iron barrel, then locked. After a while, he opened it. Nothing was seen. It turned out he was standing behind with his arms crossed, smiling. Strange. Just earn money to eat, Prince. It's their job to make a living. It's easier than hoeing the land, farming. While talking to Channa, the prince suddenly heard the sound of drums and trumpets, melodious and bustling, along with joyful singing and singing. A group of people in colorful costumes walked beside 2 palanquins beautifully decorated with fabric, silk, and fresh flowers. It turned out to be a wedding procession to the husband's house. The prince smiled and looked on as if silently blessing the bride and groom. Then somewhere in his ears, he heard the chanting of the Brahmins. 4 men were carrying a bamboo scaffold, on top of which was a corpse. As they approached, they saw a young woman with dark blue hair, a pale, gaunt face, and closed eyes. A cotton blanket was covering her stomach, her pale, thin legs sticking out. In front were 2 Brahmins walking barefoot, wearing faded white robes, chanting prayers. The prince listened, knowing that it was from the Rig Veda, but had been transformed and changed a little in the human world. O Eternal One, O Rama bright, exalted holy name, you are the Lord of heaven's skies, the Father of our flame. Your eyes the sun and moon above, your soul a shining star, your arms stretch wide like mountains tall, and rivers near and far. The human form, a vast expanse of plains and mighty sea, man is the force of life itself, of grace and harmony. O Rama, bless us with your light, have mercy, hear our plea. We're mustard seeds, we're dust and sand, yet souls that long to be. "O save us, Rama, from this storm, supreme, so kind and wise. We ask for shelter in your arms, beneath your watchful eyes." The chanting voice was steady. The words seemed earnest, but somehow they did not move me at all. Walking behind were probably relatives, kinsfolk, and family members. They walked, also silently, without a word of complaint, without a cry. The prince signaled, and with Channa accompanying him, he walked at the back, following the funeral procession to the hillside. Here was an open-air cemetery. The stench was strong. Scattered here and there were white bones, human skulls, and corpses thrown haphazardly, looking inhuman. Crows, eagles, vultures, hawks saw people and flew around frantically. A high pile of firewood was prepared, and the girl's body was placed on top. The Brahmins chanted again and sprinkled sacred soma water. A large torch was lit on the pile of firewood. Thanks to the tinder and the wood, the fire caught on quickly and flared up. A moment later, the fire licked around, flaring up, and the smoke filled the air, mixed with the acrid smell of burning flesh. Looking at the rising flames, the Brahmins chanted prayers to the fire god Agni to burn the impure body. "O glorious Agni, god of flame, majestic, bright, and pure, you are the soul of all the world. Through you, all things endure. Through you, all beings come to life and grow and take their form. Through you, they walk upon this earth and face both calm and storm. When mortal bodies turn to dust, you burn away the stain. You cleanse the soul of earthly grime and free it from its pain. Through you, divine fire brightly glows to light the darkest night. Ignorance and impurity are banished by your light. O Agni, hear our humble plea. We pray with faith so true. Please save this creature. Guide the soul to heaven's skies through you. Burn bright, O fire, shine evermore, your flame forever high. O glorious, immortal one, O Agni of the sky." The prayer ended. The prince said softly, whispering to Channa, "Well done! Well said, Channa." In fact, there are some passages much better than this. Perhaps these priestly chanters have not learned them? Your Highness is truly knowledgeable. Could your Highness read it softly to this ignorant servant? Oh, okay. Then the prince read, "O ashes, burn to ashes now, all joy, all tears, all pain. O Agni, fire, burn it all, what's lost will not remain. This body's crossed the final line. Destroyed, it fades away. This side must die, the other lives and turns to ash today. O ashes, burn to ashes deep, life's filled with toil and strife. Burn on, O Agni, burn it all, the fleeting things of life. All glory, shame, and wins and loss, all praise, all pain and cheer, all melt into the endless sky as clouds just disappear. O Agni mighty, burn so bright, in endless sacred flame you hold the path from death to life, immortal without name. Great, meaningful. It's worth spending a lifetime serving a great master." "Slurp your lips," the prince snapped. Channa suddenly wondered, "But can Agni take souls to heaven, prince?" The prince suddenly became pensive. "Truly, I do not know, Channa. The dead have good and bad people. Does Agni not know the difference between black and white, good and bad? Does he take everyone who prays and offers him gifts to heaven? I doubt it." Channa nodded. "Yes, the prince is wiser than even Agni." The prince said sadly, "I am not yet wise, Channa. I am still in the dark, I am helpless. Then I, then you, then my father, then my aunt, then Yasodhara. In the end, our fate will lie on the pyre. Then all will be reduced to ashes. Then what meaning, what value will this life have? In the end, will it be reduced to ashes?" Channa was silent and sighed. The prince was also silent and sighed. A moment later, the prince asked again, "Channa, have you seen many dead people?" "Yes, I see a lot. And I hear a lot too. The Vedas also mention air burial and water burial. What are they?" Channa pointed to a tall trellis standing alone on the hillside, next to some old trees, and explained, "That tree was where people used to put corpses, but they didn't cremate them. They just left them there for crows, vultures, eagles, hawks, to peck at, to fight over, and after a few days the corpses were just skeletons." "Yes, I understand," said the prince. "That is empty burial, also known as bird burial, because the ancient scriptures say it is for giving alms to winged creatures. Sometimes in some places there are corpses that are buried with no known burial object." Channa continued, "When the dead have been brought to the cemetery, waiting for the bereaved family to leave, the butcher stays behind, uses his knife to chop off each arm, each leg, each bone, and then throws it to the birds. And at that time, it is the bird festival season. They hold a big feast. How horrible. That is humiliation." What about water burial? Have you seen it? Chana seemed to know. At the Banganan River northwest of the capital and the Rohini River in the middle of the border, bordering Kolia, there were occasional water burials. At the Ganga River in the Varanasi region, water burials occurred daily. Only the wealthy could afford to buy firewood to cremate the corpse, and then the ashes were scattered in the river. If there was little firewood and the corpse did not burn completely, it was left as it was and thrown to the water god. As for the poor, who could not afford to buy firewood, they just threw the corpse into the river. Most of them were of the Sutra and lowly Chandala castes. Occasionally, there was the body of a saint. Saint? Yes, especially the section of the Ganges River that passes through the Varanasi River. This is the land of traditional Brahmanism, which has been established here for a long time. Every now and then, an ascetic or a naked ascetic appears with extraordinary abilities, who is admired and revered by everyone and considered a saint. In this case, they hold a very big ceremony on the riverbank, then make a raft of bananas or trees and let it float on the river, covered with fresh flowers, and the prayers reach the blue clouds. The prince frowned. "How do you know so much, Chana?" "Yes, I heard people tell me." "Everyone knows those stories, Your Highness." The prince thought to himself, "Yes, everyone knows and sees those things, but I don't. And there are so many things happening outside the gates of this capital. For a long time I have been like a blind and deaf person." "Well, let's go home, Chana." The prince walked thoughtfully. Due to his habit of living in his inner world, that night the prince kept tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Late at night, too tired, the prince fell asleep and fell into another dream. The prince saw himself lying on a carpet woven from all kinds of fine silk, extremely thin and extremely light, studded with countless tiny pearls. Then those countless pearls suddenly moved and turned into smooth mother snakes and baby snakes, slithering back and forth, injecting venom to prick the skin until it was numb and painful. A moment later, from all four sides appeared four demons with green faces, yellow fangs, red tongues, and heads wearing buffalo horns, deer horns, stag horns, and rhino horns. Two demons grabbed his two arms, two demons grabbed his two legs, and they dragged him in four different directions. He was in pain, struggling and struggling, but could not escape their iron-hooked hands. They laughed loudly, giggling, seemingly delighted. Suddenly, an explosion came from mid-sky, and the dark universe suddenly lit up. The four demons let go of their hands, frightened, and stood still. In the middle of the void, the sun from the east and the moon from the west slowly moved, slowly approaching each other, and then closing into one. The light was both brilliant and gentle, pouring out into the quiet, warm space. The prince felt a strange peace he had never felt before in his life. A moment later, the sun and moon stood still, only blinking for a few moments before falling down, growing larger and larger, then covering him. Now, the prince saw himself sitting in the heart of the sun and the moon like a transparent sphere, like a great soap bubble floating, flying high, flying far, flying up until some heavenly realm. Then the clouds turned into flowers, the mist played music, and the wind blew a lively, urgent song. "The time has come, O noble prince. The time has come at last. O Bodhisattva, rise today, your vow is strong and vast. For 7 asamkhyas long, your heart was filled with light. For 9 asamkhyas you sought the paramita's height. Through countless Buddhas you have learned and gained the path so true. For eons and 100 kalpas, now waits the work to do. So why delay what holds you back from walking on the way? Why hesitate, O Bodhisattva? This is your destined day. For birth and age and sickness pull all beings to despair. They're trapped within samsara's wheel, caught in the endless snare. With your wisdom's mighty force, you tear the veil of night, awaken all from ignorance and lead them to the light. The time has come, O Bodhisattva. Answer the sacred call. Go forth and pave the path to life, to free and save us all. In the morning, although still tired, the prince walked with Chana through the north gate. Something in the prince was almost ripe. The streets and houses at the exit of the city gate were becoming more and more sparse. There were only a few carriages and pedestrians. This was also the path that the hermits from the Himalayas were taking. The prince was terrified that he would encounter something, some sign that was not yet clear. Chana said, "It's so boring over here, prince. There's nothing to see. Yes, I know, replied the prince. Traveling is an opportunity to see, to hear, and to contemplate. There is no place where there is nothing, Channa. Channa frowned, not understanding. When they left the northern gate about half a yojana away, they met a person. It was a monk wearing bright yellow robes, his eyes looking down, calm, alms bowl in hand, leisurely walking. The prince was speechless. He had never seen a monk with such a majestic and otherworldly appearance. His face, his robes, his steps seemed to radiate a halo. The monk's peace and quiet seemed to permeate the surrounding space. The prince stopped. Waiting until the priest was within reach, he spoke softly. Please allow me to ask you a few questions. The monk stopped and spoke softly. Just ask, the king. The prince felt cold. After a while, he stammered and asked, Sir, are you from Tuyet's son? Yes, the monk nodded. Just ask the main questions, young man. Yes, sir, I am quite curious. Please excuse me. I would like to know the reason for your renunciation. The monk gently raised his head, his dark blue eyes reflecting the calm sky, and softly said, Fellow practitioner, I feel old age, sickness, and death pressing, shackling, and binding me tightly within the siege of the finite. In that cruel existence, so much suffering and affliction dominates the small lives of all species, and humans are the only sentient beings who can feel the suffering of their fate. Where does the fire come from that burns forever in my heart, in your heart, fellow practitioner? All of these are the reasons for me to seek the path of liberation, comprehensive and complete, fellow practitioner. The prince shuddered and asked again, So have you met that goal yet? Or are you looking for a way to reach the Brahma? No, the monk shook his head and smiled. I do not seek the Brahmanical body as in the tradition of the Brahmins. Besides, if there is such a being, he is also subject to birth and death, my friend. I follow my own path, the path that illuminates the darkness of human ignorance. And I must also find a remedy to save this world that is filled with suffering, my friend. The sounds, the ideas, the meanings of the monk seemed to be pouring out from his mind, from his subconscious. Those ideas had been stirring for a long time in the eggshell, now becoming a pure chick opening its eyes to the world. The prince was stunned. After a while, he continued to ask, Sir, I understand. And how do you feel in that ascetic life of renunciation? I am at peace, my friend, and I have no more questions about life, about birth and death and suffering, my friend. I am completely clear and silent. The monk had been walking for a long time, but the prince was still rooted to the spot. This path, yes, only this path was the only and ultimate path. What had been unclear and undefined for so long had now begun to appear. Crown Prince! Crown Prince! Seeing the prince standing motionless for too long, Channa called out and shook him awake. What? Channa pointed to the end of the trail. Surprised and frightened, he said, That monk, Star? He went down the path, farther and farther away, fading away and then disappearing. He was clearly gone. He was gone, my prince. Oh, that night, after making up his mind, the prince confided to Yasodhara, Sooner or later I will go, Gopa. That is what I have decided. It has gradually taken shape in me through recent dreams. For many long nights, that call to go has been urging in my ears like an eternal prayer. And then in the past few weeks, old age, sickness, death, and the monk as the four messengers have appeared, just as the ancient sages had prophesied. My mind is made up. Please sympathize with me, Gopa. Yasodhara with tears flowing silently. I know that sooner or later you will leave. This drop of blood, this fetus, this child about to be born, cannot hold you back. But leaving now, I am not mentally prepared to endure a separation. Right now, I need you very much. The prince comforted and consoled. Thank you, Gopa. I know, and I also understand that you must avoid excessive emotion before the time of delivery. You are the one who is in tune with my thoughts, and perhaps you have also supported my aspirations in many past lives. I read it in your eyes, in your kind, gentle heart, and in that slender, high, bright, radiant forehead. I am not leaving now. However, it will not be long now. I am leaving, but I will return when all the worries of life have ended. Yasodhara breathed out. Ever since he discussed with his friends the meaning and value of life, what is ephemeral, what is eternal, and also since those three dreams came to me, I knew that my arms and love were too small, unable to hold on to the pink bird. The white elephant would sooner or later leave without looking back. So I cherish this child, meaning his soul, his life, his breath will always be by my side." After a long silence to let Yasodhara's thoughts subside, the prince said, "The material world is ephemeral, frothy. Even its sweetness will at some point numb the tongue, drying up all sublime values. Her suffering, mine, life's, and all living beings' suffering is endless. We must find a comprehensive remedy to eradicate suffering, at its root, Gopa." The prince gently placed Yasodhara on the pillow, deliberately cherishing her sleep. "Go to sleep, Gopa. From now on, I will love you and take care of you. That is my ultimate joy and only happiness, Your Highness." Suddenly the prince asked, "Did the child struggle and trample, causing you pain, Gopa?" "Not much, just sometimes. Maybe he's a good and dutiful son. Boy?" Yes, the midwife looked at the fetus and guessed. A small, neat fetus is a boy, a big, bulky fetus is a girl. The prince smiled and said, "So do you like boys or girls?" "Son, I would love a son just like you." The prince felt light and happy. He never expected that the most difficult thing to say would be said. Yasodhara was truly a rare and beautiful woman. Her mind and heart were both wonderful. Dear ladies and gentlemen, you have just listened to the video about the life of Buddha Shakyamuni, adapted from the work A Life, a Sun and Moon by Master Gioi Duc. This video series will be broadcast at 7 p.m. every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the YouTube channel Buddhist Story. We sincerely thank you for watching. To not miss the next episodes, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. If you find the content useful, please share this video with your relatives and friends. All your comments are very valuable to us. Please leave comments below the video so we can discuss and share together. Thank you, and see you again in the next episodes of the video series, The Life of Buddha Shakyamuni.